He gave his last water to a thirsty child, and by morning 500 spears blocked the road. The true enemy wasn't just the warriors ahead, but fear itself, carried by men like Roy Higgins who pulled the trigger too fast. Yet Samuel Decker's quiet act of kindness didn't go unseen. Not by the girl, and not by those who stood behind her. And just wait until you see how this tense standoff twisted into something no one expected, when justice found its own way through the silence. The desert trail groaned under the weight of wooden wheels and tired hooves. It was July of 1868, and the sun above the southern Colorado plains burned without mercy. Dust curled in the air with every slow turn of the supply wagons, and the breath of the land itself felt scorched and still. Somewhere behind the column of settlers, a kettle rattled in the back of the last wagon, and next to it stood a man few would notice. Samuel Decker was not a leader, not a soldier, not a preacher. He was the cook. Middle-aged, quiet, and broad-shouldered, he wore his canvas hat low and spoke only when asked. His life was a rhythm of iron pots, dried beans, and the crackle of campfires. He had joined the expedition not for gold or glory, but because cooking was the one thing he did well, and the trail needed someone to feed the mouths that marched westward. That morning, the group had run low on water. Not out, not yet, but low enough that men whispered over their canteens and counted what remained. Schedules tightened, tempers rose. Then Samuel saw her. A girl, no older than 9, stood still at the edge of the sagebrush. She did not cry. Her face was still, but her cracked lips and slow blinking said enough. Her dark braids were half undone, her skin dry from heat and wind. She was Ute, one of the many indigenous children in these lands, and she stood alone. One by one, the others noticed her. A few riders slowed, but none dismounted. A mother pulled her boy closer. One man murmured something under his breath, gripping the handle of his pistol. In their silence, Samuel heard what wasn't said. "She's not our problem." But he stepped down. The heat was thick between them. As Samuel walked toward her, the girl didn't move. He loosened the cork of the flask that had been hanging on his belt since sunrise. It was his own, not shared, not rationed. It held perhaps 3 gulps of water. That was all. He knelt in front of her. He said nothing. She said nothing. He offered her the flask. For a moment she hesitated, then with both hands she took it. Carefully, gratefully. She drank slow, as if each drop mattered. From the brush nearby, shadows moved. Samuel knew he was being watched. Eyes, quiet and still, hidden among the rocks. Maybe family, maybe scouts, maybe neither. He stood, gave her a small nod, and walked back toward the wagon. He didn't look over his shoulder. He didn't speak of it when he returned. That evening, when others complained about dry lips and empty canteens, Samuel said nothing. He cooked what he could, then sat beside the fire, watching the flames. There was no applause. No thank you. Only the crackling of wood and the weight of the quiet air. But deep inside, something shifted. Not pride, not fear. Something smaller, but stronger. A sense that even in the most parched corners of the world, one act of kindness still mattered. He didn't know her name. He never asked. But before the sun rose again, her presence would change everything. Night came quietly to the plains. The wind settled into a warm hush, and the firelight flickered low among the dry stones of the encampment. The caravan had stopped near the edge of a dried riverbed, its cracked earth stretching like broken glass beneath the fading sky. One by one, voices hushed, and the camp sank into a restless sleep. Samuel Decker sat alone near the embers of his cook fire. The stew pot, nearly empty, hung tilted above glowing coals. Behind him, settlers tucked themselves under canvas sheets, tired and thirsty. The day's water had been rationed to its last drop. What little was left had been reserved for the horses. No one complained aloud, but the mood was brittle, as if the whole camp knew how close they were to running out of more than just water. Samuel stared into the fire without speaking. His thoughts drifted back to the girl, how she had looked at him, how she had accepted the flask. No fear, no thanks, just quiet understanding. He didn't know what made him do it. Maybe it was the way the others turned away. Maybe it was the way she didn't beg, or maybe it was something deeper, a feeling he hadn't known he still had. A part of him that remembered what it meant to act without expecting anything in return. Somewhere beyond the darkness, The land was watching. He had seen the shadows in the brush. He knew he was not alone when he handed over the flask. Whoever stood among those trees had seen it too. Family? Warriors? The thought came and went, but he didn't fear it. Not in that moment, because for the first time in months, maybe years, Samuel felt something other than weariness. He felt the small spark of hope, a belief that his act might reach further than he could see, that it might matter. He imagined the girl returning to her people, whispering of the stranger who gave her water, of the man who didn't look away. Maybe, if they believed her, there could be room for peace. Maybe the next encounter on this land wouldn't begin with weapons drawn. Behind him, someone stirred. A cough, a shift of blankets. The night was still dry, and sleep came uneasily. He lay down beside the fire, pulled his blanket to his chest, and watched the sky. The stars stretched wide and clean above him, unbothered by men's choices. Just before he closed his eyes, he thought, what if the world really could change from something so small? And then he slept, not knowing that by sunrise the road ahead would be sealed by 500 silent spears. The first light broke over the hills, like a quiet warning. It spilled across the dry grass in a pale gold, casting long shadows between the wagons and tents. Birds stirred in the distance, and the wind picked up the faint scent of dust. The world felt calm, but too calm. Samuel was the first to rise. Years of trail work had made him an early riser. He always liked the stillness before the camp woke, when the world felt hushed, as if listening. But this morning, that hush was different. It wasn't peaceful. It was holding its breath. He walked past the wagons, rubbing his shoulders, glancing up at the sky. The air was cooler than the day before. No voices yet. No movement. Just the faint rattle of canvas in the breeze and the creak of leather straps on the supply carts. That's when he noticed the horses. They weren't grazing. They weren't lying down. They were standing rigid, heads up, ears turned east. Alert. Watching. Samuel followed their gaze. At first he thought it was a mirage, a trick of the dawn haze, but the shapes were there, just beyond the tree line where the trail narrowed between two hills. Figures. Still. Lined shoulder to shoulder across the road ahead. Spears. Not 10, not 20, hundreds. The wood tips caught the morning light like rows of tall, silent thorns. Behind them stood men, broad, steady, unmoving, warriors. Each one grounded in the earth like a tree that had always been there. Samuel stepped back instinctively, his breath catching in his throat. He didn't shout. He didn't run. Instead, he turned and walked quickly back to camp, his boots silent on the packed dirt. By the time the others rose, the mood had shifted. Faces turned toward the trail. Voices fell quiet. Mothers pulled children behind wagons. One of the guards, a man named Roy Higgins, took out his rifle and gripped it too tightly. "They've blocked the road," someone muttered. A murmur passed through the group, low and uncertain. Some reached for weapons. Others just stood, frozen between fear and confusion. Then someone pointed. "Look." Near the front of the line of warriors, a single figure stepped forward. Not a man. A child. The girl. She stood calmly, just behind one of the tall warriors. A leader, perhaps. Her braid had been retied. She wore a necklace of small blue beads, and though the wind moved her sleeves, her expression did not change. Samuel's heart dropped. He had hoped his act would bring understanding, that the flask of water might be seen as a bridge. But now, as the morning air filled with tension, he realized the truth was more complicated. This wasn't a moment of gratitude. It was a reckoning, and the line of 500 spears stood as proof. Something had changed, not just between people, but between worlds. The path ahead was no longer open. The camp stood still, as if the wind itself had gone quiet to watch what would happen next. The line of Ute warriors remained unmoved, their spears planted firmly in the earth, a wall of intent drawn across the morning trail. Behind them, the hills curved gently, their silence deepening the sense of something ancient at play, something older than the road, the wagons, or the men. The settlers had gathered near the front wagon. Some stood frozen, others paced in anxious circles. Whispers turned into short commands. A few men called for someone to speak, anyone, but the voices were disjointed, fueled more by fear than reason. Samuel stood off to the side, his hands open and empty. He watched the girl, the same child he had helped only the day before. now standing in quiet protection behind the tall man at the center of the line. Her presence was not one of fear or shame. She seemed calm, grounded. But her gaze met his, and for a brief moment, it wasn't a look of thanks. It was a warning. Samuel took one step forward. "I can talk to them," he said, voice low but steady. "Let me try." But it was too late. From behind, the click of a rifle bolt split the air. Roy Higgins, the same man who had scowled at the girl the day before, was gripping his weapon, knuckles white. Sweat rolled down his temple. His eyes flicked from face to face, searching for permission that would never come. "Back off," someone muttered. But Roy didn't back off. He moved. One step forward, one raised barrel, and the stillness shattered. A single shot rang out. No one knew where it landed. No one knew if it was meant as a warning or something worse. But it didn't matter. The moment the sound echoed across the trail, the line of spears moved. It wasn't a charge. It wasn't a yell. It was a shift, swift and exact, like a wave folding into itself. Men moved forward with measured precision, stepping in unison. The message was clear. The line had been crossed. Panic spread through the camp. Women called for their children. Men fumbled for their packs. One wagon wheel snapped as someone tried to turn it too fast. Dust filled the air, kicked up by boots and hooves. Confusion became noise. Noise became chaos. And through it all, Samuel remained still. He turned slowly and faced the wall of warriors now less than 40 paces away. His heart raced, but he kept his hands raised, empty and open. "Please," he said aloud, not knowing if anyone understood him. This wasn't meant to happen. The Ute leader stepped forward. His expression was unreadable. At his side, the girl, her braid swaying gently, held the now empty flask in both hands. She looked up at the tall man, then back at Samuel. No words were spoken, not yet. But something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not threat, just understanding that the choices of one could never undo the fear of many. Behind Samuel, the settlers scrambled to regroup. Some yelled his name. Others begged him to run. He did not move, because he understood what they did not. This wasn't a battle waiting to happen. It was a decision already made. By midday, the road was empty. The wind had stilled, as if it, too, had nothing left to say. Ashes from the cooking fire drifted in soft spirals across the dry ground. A wheel track veered off toward a stand of cottonwoods and ended abruptly where the soil turned hard. Near it lay a broken crate, a child's scarf caught in its splinters. All across the clearing, the remnants of a life in motion had come to rest. Silent, fractured, incomplete. The wagons were gone, the settlers were gone. The noise, the shouts, the confusion, all had vanished into the hills. And yet, Samuel Decker remained. He sat at the edge of the riverbed, knees drawn up, hands clasped loosely together, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the trail had once pointed forward. The sun hung low, though it was not yet evening, and the light spread in a thin, washed-out gold. He had not spoken since the morning. No one had spoken to him. There had been no fight, not really. No declaration. No ending that could be told simply. Only a moment. A moment that changed everything. When the shot rang out, he hadn't run. He hadn't shouted. He had only stood still as the line of Ute warriors began to move. Their steps had not been rushed. There was no panic, no chaos in their formation, just a decision made in silence, carried out with the weight of generations behind it. And yet, they had passed him. He had expected judgment, maybe punishment. Instead, they had looked at him, really looked, and then kept walking. Not as if he were invisible, as if he no longer belonged to the same story. At the end of their line, the girl had passed, quiet as she had arrived the day before. Her eyes met his just once. She carried the empty flask carefully, its leather strap wrapped twice around her wrist like a ribbon of memory. She held it not as a trophy, and not as a keepsake. She held it like a question that hadn't yet been answered. Then they were gone, into the trees, over the ridge, back into the land that had always been theirs. Samuel had remained where he was, even after the wind picked up again. He did not search the camp. He did not count who had left or who might return. He simply sat in the quiet, letting it settle around him like a second skin. Only as the sun dipped further did he begin to move. He gathered what remained, a kettle, dented but usable, a knife, the small sack of dried beans he had tucked under his blanket the night before. He looped his satchel across his chest and stood for a long while, facing the direction the caravan had come from. He did not turn back. He did not turn toward the UTEs either. Instead, he walked north, alone, slow, and steady. Not because he had a destination, but because staying still felt like giving up on something he hadn't yet named. He did not believe he had done enough, but he knew what he had done, and sometimes that had to be enough. The land ahead stretched wide and unforgiving, but he felt no fear, only the steady weight of memory, of the girl, of the flask, of the moment that could have become peace, if only the rest of the world had paused long enough to let it grow. The trail no longer led forward, not the way it once had, but still, he walked, with nothing but what he carried, and everything that it meant.